What would you do if everything you ever fought for was taken away in a single night? For former Navy diver Victor Langston, a peaceful life at sea seemed within reach, until the Mexican cartel arrived. They stole from him, humiliated him, and underestimated him. But they forgot one crucial fact. Victor wasn't just a fisherman. He was once one of the deadliest underwater operatives in military history. Now, his tranquil world becomes a battlefield again. But this time, it's personal. Victor Langston worked in silence. His fishing boat rocked gently on the harbor as the golden hues of dawn spread across the water. It was a rare morning of peace, the kind he had learned to savor in his retirement. After decades in the Navy, he wanted nothing more than to live quietly in the coastal village of Dry Creek, where people knew him simply as the old fisherman. But peace, he had come to understand, was temporary. The first sign of trouble came just after noon. Victor was unloading his latest catch when a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the dock. Men with hard eyes and tattoos emerged, their gazes sweeping across the harbor like predators sizing up prey. Victor's instincts flared. This wasn't a friendly visit. He'd seen that look before in war zones. He stepped back toward his boat as one of the men, their leader, approached. "Nice haul, old man," the leader sneered, glancing at the crates of fresh fish. "We'll be taking some of it. For tax purposes." Victor stared at him, expression neutral. "Tax? I don't recall you working the nets this morning." The man's face hardened. "You don't get a choice. This is cartel territory now. You play by our rules, or you pay the price." Victor's muscles tensed. He wanted to fight, but he held back. He knew better than to escalate here and now. He'd fought wars where restraint was the key to survival. Instead, he calmly lifted one of the crates and set it in front of them. "Take what you need," he said, voice steady but cold. "Just remember, everyone pays their dues in the end." The leader chuckled darkly. "You've got guts for an old man, but don't push your luck." He motioned for his men to grab the fish, and within minutes, the convoy was gone. Victor stood there, his mind racing. He had to act fast. Victor went inside his small cabin and opened a hidden compartment in the floor. Beneath it lay the tools of a life he thought he'd left behind. Underwater surveillance drones, encrypted communication devices, and a knife that had saved his life more times than he could count. He activated a small tracker he'd discreetly planted on one of the cartel's SUVs, watching the signal blink on a nearby monitor. He wasn't alone in this fight. His former squad mates had scattered across the country after retiring, but they had a pact. Whenever one of them needed help, they would answer the call. Victor sent out a coded message: "Danger at Dry Creek. Cartel interference. Requesting backup." As he waited for a response, Victor gazed out at the ocean. The calm waters betrayed nothing of the storm brewing beneath. He knew what was coming. The cartel had declared war on him, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. But they would learn soon enough. Victor remained on edge as the waves gently lapped at the hull of his boat. The monitor on his table blinked steadily, showing the tracker signal moving inland. The cartel was retreating to one of their hidden strongholds. He knew better than to follow without a plan. In his former life, rushing in had been a death sentence. He leaned back in his chair, memories rushing in like a tide he couldn't stop. The last time he had faced enemies like this was years ago on a covert mission off the Gulf of Mexico. Back then, his squad had dismantled a major smuggling operation. One mistake, however, a trusted local contact turning traitor, had cost them dearly. Victor had lost 2 close teammates that day. He hadn't forgotten, nor forgiven. Now, the past was creeping back to haunt him. His thoughts were interrupted by the chirping sound of his encrypted radio. A familiar voice crackled through. "Langston? This is Maddox. I got your signal." Victor exhaled, relieved. Maddox was one of the few people he trusted completely. They'd served together in deep-sea reconnaissance. "Good to hear you, Maddox. We've got a problem here. Cartel's muscling in on the harbor." "Cartel? Hell, I thought you moved to Dry Creek to get away from that kind of trouble." "I did," Victor replied, his voice low. "They brought it here. Took supplies from my boat. They're gearing up for something bigger. I'm on my way. ETA 6 hours. You need anyone else on the team?" Maddox's tone grew serious. "Not yet," Victor said. Let's keep this quiet for now. But if things go south, I'll need more hands. Victor ended the call and turned back to the monitor. The tracker was moving again, this time toward a small industrial site near the forested edge of town. He clenched his jaw. He'd been hoping for more time, but the cartel was accelerating their operations. It was time to take the first step. 2 hours later, Victor arrived at the edge of the industrial site under the cover of darkness. He moved silently through the trees, dressed in a tactical wetsuit designed for stealth operations. His boat was docked nearby in a secluded inlet in case he needed a quick retreat. As he crouched behind a fence, he watched several cartel members unloading crates from a truck. One of them barked orders in Spanish. "Get everything inside. We move at dawn." Victor observed closely, noting their equipment. They weren't just smugglers. These men were armed like soldiers. He quietly activated a drone no larger than a soda can. It hovered soundlessly, capturing footage of their movements. This was no ordinary operation. Something bigger was in play. Suddenly, his radio buzzed softly in his ear. It was Maddox again. "Victor, got eyes on your location. You weren't kidding. That's heavy firepower for a bunch of cartel thugs." Victor smirked. "Told you. Think you can sneak in without blowing your cover?" "Please. I wrote the book on stealth," Maddox replied. Moments later, Victor saw a shadowy figure approaching from the opposite direction. Maddox had arrived, blending seamlessly into the darkness. "Good to see you," Maddox whispered as he joined Victor behind cover. "Likewise," Victor said, nodding toward the building. "They're planning something big. We need to find out what." Maddox grinned. "Let's give them a little surprise, then." The two men moved like ghosts through the facility. Victor disabled security cameras while Maddox planted small tracking devices on the trucks. They overheard snippets of conversation from the cartel's radios. Mentions of shipment routes and new buyers confirmed Victor's suspicions. This wasn't just a local operation. But as they continued deeper into the site, they encountered something unexpected. A large steel door with biometric security. Maddox frowned. "They're using military-grade tech. How the hell did they get this?" Victor's eyes narrowed. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Someone on the inside is helping them. Someone with resources and connections. Before Maddox could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Victor motioned for them to hide in a nearby storage room. They waited in tense silence as two cartel enforcers walked by, their conversation giving away crucial information. "The boss says we're shipping out tomorrow," one of them said. "You think the old man at the harbor knows anything?" "Nah, he's just some washed-up fisherman," the other scoffed. "We'll deal with him later." Victor exchanged a look with Maddox. They had all the confirmation they needed. The cartel underestimated him, and they were about to learn how deadly that mistake could be. As the cartel members disappeared down the hall, Victor whispered, "Time to send them a message." Maddox grinned. "Let's make it loud and clear." Victor reached for a small detonator hidden in his pocket. The traps were set. This war had just begun. Victor and Maddox moved swiftly through the maze of storage rooms and corridors. Every step had to be calculated. They couldn't risk alerting the cartel too soon, not before their plan was set in motion. The small charges Maddox had placed on key equipment would deliver a message loud and clear. But the real challenge was staying one step ahead of cartel reinforcements. "Once we light this place up, they'll come running," Maddox whispered, crouching by an electrical panel. "We need to be out of here before that happens." Victor nodded. He checked the time on his watch. 2 minutes until their convoy pulls in with more supplies. "We timed the detonations right, and they'll have no chance to regroup." The first explosion rocked the facility earlier than expected. Sparks and debris shot out from the building's northern wing. Victor's jaw tightened. "That wasn't one of ours." A crackling voice came through Maddox's earpiece. "You think you're the only ones with a plan?" It was deep and chilling, taunting them. The voice continued, "Your little fireworks show just got hijacked. We've been expecting you." Maddox swore under his breath. They knew. They must have intercepted your drone feed earlier. Victor's mind raced. If the cartel had anticipated their moves, then this facility was a trap from the start. "We need to split up. You finish disabling the trucks. I'll find whoever's behind this." Maddox hesitated but nodded. Don't get yourself killed, Vic. I'll cover your exit if things go sideways. Victor navigated through the chaos. Alarms blared, and cartel enforcers were scrambling to put out fires and secure the site. He slipped through shadows, his footsteps drowned by the noise. As he moved deeper into the facility, he encountered something he hadn't expected, an old Navy insignia spray-painted on a wall. Victor froze. He traced the symbol with his fingertips, his mind flashing back to a mission years ago. That insignia belonged to a secret division within the Navy, a group that had gone rogue after a failed operation. One of its former leaders, Darren Kane, had disappeared. Could it be him? Victor clenched his fists. If Kane was involved with the cartel, things were worse than he'd imagined. Meanwhile, Maddox finished planting the last of the explosives near the trucks. He was about to retreat when a familiar figure stepped out from behind a stack of crates. "Long time, Maddox," the man said, smirking. It was Marcus, an ex-operative they had both worked with years ago. Maddox's eyes widened in shock. "Marcus? You're supposed to be dead." Marcus chuckled darkly. "Dead? Hardly. I found better opportunities. You should have joined when you had the chance." Maddox's mind reeled. "You're working with the cartel now? You sold out everything we stood for." "Survival," Marcus corrected. "You'll learn soon enough." Maddox didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, the two men grappling fiercely. Blows landed hard and fast, their shared history fueling the intensity of the fight. At the same time, Victor reached the control center of the facility. He found a series of surveillance monitors showing live feeds of every corner of the compound. One monitor showed Maddox fighting Marcus. Another displayed cartel reinforcements closing in on their location. Victor quickly hacked into the system, disabling several key security features. Over the radio, he contacted Maddox. "You've got company heading your way. Fall back to extraction. We're cutting this short." Maddox grunted in response, still locked in combat. "Little busy here. Make it quick. We've got about 60 seconds. Victor activated a failsafe program in the cartel's security network. It triggered a complete blackout in the facility, plunging everything into darkness. Confusion erupted among the cartel soldiers, their radios filled with panicked voices. Taking advantage of the chaos, Victor moved toward Maddox's location. He arrived just in time to see Maddox disarm Marcus and deliver a knockout blow. "Nice timing," Maddox muttered, wiping blood from his lip. "We're not done yet," Victor replied. "Let's move." As they made their way to the exit, a series of explosions rippled through the facility. Flames and smoke consumed entire sections of the building. Cartel trucks burst into fireballs as the charges detonated in perfect sequence. The two men sprinted through the chaos, dodging falling debris and gunfire. They reached the extraction point, where Victor's boat was waiting in the nearby inlet. "You weren't kidding about sending a message," Maddox said as they boarded the vessel. Victor started the engine, steering them into the open waters. "Message delivered. But this isn't over." As the boat sped away, Victor's radio crackled again. This time, the voice wasn't Cartel, it was Kane. "You've made a mistake, Langston," Kane said calmly. "You think you can walk away from this, but you don't know what you're up against. I'll be seeing you soon." Victor gritted his teeth. The war had just escalated, and now an old enemy was back in the picture. He glanced at Maddox, whose expression mirrored his own grim determination. "We'll be ready," Victor whispered. "Whatever it takes." The flames from the facility illuminated the night sky behind them as they disappeared into the darkness of the ocean, preparing for the battles ahead. Victor and Maddox returned to Dry Creek under the cover of dawn. The village remained quiet, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier. But Victor knew that the cartel wouldn't take this defeat lightly. They had stirred a hornet's nest, and retaliation would come, sooner than expected. As they secured Victor's boat in the hidden cove near his cabin, Maddox broke the silence. "That voice on the radio, you know him, don't you?" Victor nodded grimly. "Darren Kane. He led a classified unit, Navy Special Operations Division 9. He disappeared after a failed mission in Colombia. We thought he went rogue, but no one knew for sure. Looks like he's been working with the cartel all along." Maddox's face hardened. If Kane's involved, this is bigger than just smuggling. He's got military training, connections, and tactics. He'll use everything he knows to hunt us down. Let him try, Victor said coldly. He made it personal when he came to Dry Creek. Later that day, Victor received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Ben Walker, an old friend and former Marine, arrived at the cabin. He walked in without knocking, his face tense. "Vic, we've got a problem," Walker said. Victor gestured for him to sit. "Let me guess. Cartel activity near the town?" Walker nodded. "My deputies found several cartel trucks abandoned on the outskirts. One of them was rigged with explosives. They didn't go off, but this wasn't some routine operation. It's like they're sending a warning." Victor's eyes narrowed. "They know I'm here. Kane's moving faster than I thought." Maddox crossed his arms. "If Kane is setting traps around town, we need to act now. We can't let him corner us." Walker leaned forward. "What are we dealing with here, Vic? This isn't just some small-time drug gang, is it?" Victor hesitated, then spoke. "No, it's not. Kane's running a paramilitary operation. He's got resources, and he's targeting anyone who gets in his way. That includes this town." Walker nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do what I can to keep the locals safe. But if this escalates, you're going to need more than just me." That evening, Victor and Maddox scouted the outskirts of Dry Creek. They found fresh tire tracks leading to an abandoned grain storage facility. Inside, they discovered surveillance equipment, cameras pointed at key roads and buildings around the village. Kane's men were monitoring their every move. "This isn't surveillance," Maddox muttered as he examined the setup. "It's recon. They're planning a coordinated assault." Victor frowned. "We can't wait for them to strike. We hit them first." Maddox nodded in agreement, but before they could destroy the equipment, a sudden noise echoed through the building. Footsteps. The lights in the facility flickered, then shut off completely. Darkness enveloped them. "Stay sharp," Victor whispered, drawing his knife. A voice echoed through the building, chilling and familiar. "Langston, always 2 steps behind," Kane taunted. "You think you've outmaneuvered me? You're standing in my trap." Gunfire erupted, forcing Victor and Maddox to take cover behind rusted machinery. Shadows moved through the darkness, cartel soldiers closing in on them. "They've been waiting for us," Maddox growled. "We're not going down here," Victor replied. "Follow my lead." Victor activated a small device on his belt, releasing an infrared beacon that only he and Maddox could see with their tactical goggles. The beacon guided them through a series of hidden tunnels below the facility, part of an old storm drainage system Victor had memorized from town records. The cartel soldiers pursued blindly, unaware that Victor and Maddox were already maneuvering behind them. "They'll expect us to run," Victor said quietly, "but we're going to turn this around." As the soldiers regrouped near the surveillance equipment, Victor and Maddox struck with precision. They disabled the cameras and planted small remote charges on the equipment. Moments later, the charges detonated, sending the cartel into disarray. In the confusion, Victor and Maddox escaped the facility undetected. Back at the cabin, Sheriff Walker arrived with urgent news. "We've got a bigger issue," he said. "I just got word from the state police. There's a bounty on your heads, issued by Kane himself. Every cartel in the region is looking for you." Victor exchanged a glance with Maddox. "He's trying to draw us out." Walker folded his arms. "And you're going to give him exactly what he wants, aren't you?" Victor smirked. "Not yet. First, we're going to make him regret stepping into Dry Creek." That night, Victor and Maddox set up a counteroffensive. They enlisted trusted locals, retired veterans, hunters, and ranchers to help fortify key positions around town. Walker coordinated patrols to monitor cartel movements. "We're turning the entire area into a kill zone," Maddox explained as they mapped out their strategy. "If they come, they won't leave." Victor's mind sharpened with focus. Kane thought he had the upper hand, but he was about to learn that Dry Creek wasn't defenseless. As dawn approached, the village of Dry Creek prepared for war. The trap was set, but this time, it wasn't Victor and his team who would fall into it. The sun rose slowly over Dry Creek, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. To the untrained eye, the town appeared peaceful, but beneath that calm exterior, Victor, Maddox, and Sheriff Walker had prepared a defensive operation unlike any the cartel could anticipate. They had fortified key locations, set traps, and coordinated with trusted locals. The enemy would find no easy prey here. Victor stood near the town's main street, scanning the horizon with binoculars. The signal from a hidden drone feed displayed cartel vehicles advancing from 3 directions. He lowered the binoculars and spoke into his earpiece. "They're coming in from the east, west, and south. Walker, you ready?" "Ready and waiting," Walker's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got men stationed at the old mill and water tower. No one's getting through without a fight." Victor turned to Maddox, who was loading a high-powered rifle. "You know what to do." Maddox grinned. "I'll make sure they remember Dry Creek." The cartel convoy split into 3 groups. One group approached the east entrance, expecting little resistance. As they crossed the bridge leading into town, an explosion ripped through the front vehicle. The bridge collapsed, sending 2 more vehicles plunging into the creek below. Cartel soldiers scrambled to regroup, but gunfire erupted from the tree line. Retired veterans and local hunters, positioned strategically, opened fire. The cartel quickly found themselves trapped in a kill zone. "They didn't expect that," Maddox chuckled from his sniper perch near the water tower. "One convoy down." Meanwhile, the group approaching from the west encountered another surprise. Sheriff Walker and his deputies had fortified the entrance with barricades and spike strips. When the cartel's trucks rolled over the spikes, tires shredded and engines stalled. The sheriff stepped forward with a megaphone. "You've got one chance to surrender, or you can stay and meet the same fate as your tires." The cartel soldiers hesitated, unsure how to respond. Just as they considered retreating, gunshots rang out from rooftops, more locals firing warning shots to drive the message home. The cartel scattered into the surrounding fields, where Walker's deputies were waiting in ambush positions. The southern group, however, was led by a man Victor recognized, Marcus, Maddox's old rival. Unlike the other groups, Marcus had anticipated resistance. He ordered his men to fan out, using the terrain to their advantage. They moved cautiously, avoiding obvious choke points. "They're smarter than the others," Victor muttered, watching the drone feed. "This group won't fall for simple traps." "Good," Maddox replied. "I owe Marcus a personal welcome." Marcus's team advanced toward the town square, where Victor and Maddox had set their final line of defense. Marcus noticed the lack of immediate resistance and signaled his men to stay alert. "I know you're here, Langston," Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the empty streets. "You think you can hide behind these people? You're just prolonging the inevitable." Victor didn't respond. Instead, he activated remote charges hidden in the alleyways. Explosions tore through the path behind Marcus's team, cutting off their retreat. Gunfire erupted from all directions as Victor and his allies engaged them in a coordinated attack. During the firefight, Maddox finally confronted Marcus face to face. They circled each other in the middle of the street, weapons drawn. "You never knew when to quit," Marcus sneered. "And you never knew how to stay loyal," Maddox shot back. The 2 men lunged at each other, exchanging brutal blows. The sounds of their fight echoed amid the chaos of gunfire. Maddox managed to disarm Marcus, pinning him to the ground. "You should have stayed dead," Maddox growled before knocking Marcus unconscious. Despite their losses, the cartel reinforcements kept pushing forward. Victor knew they had to end this soon or risk more collateral damage. He radioed Walker. "Sheriff, bring in the last line." Within minutes, large trucks rolled into town, blocking key escape routes. Local farmers armed with heavy equipment and makeshift barricades reinforced the town's perimeter. The cartel found themselves surrounded on all sides. "They're boxed in," Maddox confirmed. Victor stepped into the open, his voice steady but commanding. "You've lost. Lay down your weapons and walk away, or you'll leave here in body bags." For a moment, the cartel soldiers hesitated. The sight of their wounded comrades and burning vehicles broke their morale. Slowly, they began dropping their weapons. Just when it seemed the battle was over, Victor's earpiece crackled with a new transmission. "Langston," a voice called. It was Kane. "Impressive. But did you really think I'd be there in person? This was just the opening act." Victor's blood ran cold. He scanned the battlefield, realizing that something was off. The majority of cartel leadership was missing. "What's your play, Kane?" Victor demanded. "You'll find out soon enough," Kane replied ominously. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last. The radio went silent. As the sun set over Dry Creek, Victor stood in the aftermath of the battle. Cartel prisoners were rounded up, and the wounded were being tended to. Maddox walked over, wiping blood from his hands. This isn't over, Victor said quietly. Maddox nodded. No, Kane's not done with us yet. But next time, we're going after him. Victor stared out at the horizon, where darkness loomed like a gathering storm. Kane's game wasn't over, and the fight for survival had only just begun. The air in Dry Creek was tense in the days following the battle. While the cartel had been driven back, Victor knew this wasn't a victory. It was merely a temporary reprieve. Kane was still out there, and he was playing a long game. If they didn't move fast, Kane would bring something even worse to their doorstep. In the town square, Sheriff Walker briefed Victor and Maddox on new intelligence. The cartel operatives we captured aren't talking. Either they're too scared of Kane, or they've been trained to keep quiet. He crossed his arms, frustration evident in his tone. We found encrypted files in one of their trucks, but I've got no one here who can crack that kind of code. Victor glanced at Maddox. We do. Maddox smirked knowingly. I might know someone who can help. That evening, Maddox led Victor to an abandoned radio tower outside of town. There, they met with a woman named Kara Ramirez, a former military intelligence officer who specialized in electronic warfare. She had once been stationed with Maddox in Afghanistan. Kane, Kara said after scanning the encrypted files. You're telling me that bastard is alive and running operations for the cartel? Alive and thriving, Victor confirmed. Kara shook her head and sighed. Well, you're in luck. I can crack this, but it'll take a few hours. You're going to owe me for this, Maddox. Put it on my tab, Maddox said with a grin. A few hours later, Kara deciphered the files and found a list of high-value targets across the region. But what caught Victor's attention was a series of coordinates, leading to a remote compound deep in the mountains near the border. This is it, Victor muttered. Kane's base of operations. Kara leaned in closer. There's more. He's planning something big. I found references to an upcoming weapons shipment. Heavy firepower, enough to supply a small army. Maddox frowned. He's arming for war. Victor stood. We can't wait for him to strike. We need to hit that compound now. The journey to the compound was perilous. Victor, Maddox, and a small team of local allies moved through dense forests under the cover of night. They avoided cartel patrols using drones and infrared equipment. Halfway up the mountain, Victor's instincts flared. He raised a fist, signaling the team to stop. Something's wrong. A moment later, gunfire erupted from the treetops. Cartel snipers had been lying in wait. Ambush! Maddox shouted as the team scrambled for cover. Victor quickly assessed their position. They were pinned down with limited options. Then he spotted an overgrown path leading to higher ground. He radioed the team. Follow me. We need to flank them. Moving swiftly and silently, Victor led the group through the hidden path. They emerged behind the snipers and launched a counterattack. Within minutes, the ambush was neutralized. That was too close, Maddox muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. They knew we were coming, Victor said darkly. Kane's always one step ahead. The team reached the outskirts of the compound just before dawn. From their vantage point, they saw heavily armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Trucks loaded with crates of weapons were being prepared for transport. We can't take them head-on, Victor said. We need a diversion. Maddox grinned. I've got just the thing. He pulled out a small bag of explosives. While Maddox and a few others set charges on the supply trucks, Victor slipped into the compound's central building. He needed to find Kane, or at least something that would give them an edge. Inside the compound, Victor discovered a high-tech command center. Monitors displayed live surveillance feeds of several cartel operations across the border. At the center of it all was a map marking strategic targets, police stations, border checkpoints, and even Victor's hometown of Dry Creek. They're planning coordinated attacks, Victor muttered. This isn't just about smuggling. It's about control. As he scanned the room, he found a file labeled Project Revenant. The details were horrifying. Kane was acquiring biological weapons through black market deals. Victor's blood ran cold. He's escalating this into something much worse. Before Victor could process everything, the compound's alarms blared. Maddox's explosives had gone off, sending the entire facility into chaos. Victor grabbed the file and made his way toward the exit. Over the radio, Maddox's voice crackled. "Vic, you better hustle. We've got a lot of angry cartel guys heading our way." "On my way," Victor replied, dodging guards as he sprinted through the compound. As Victor reached the extraction point, he saw Maddox pinned down by gunfire near the supply trucks. Without hesitating, Victor flanked the attackers and neutralized them with precise shots. "Cutting it close, aren't you?" Maddox grinned as Victor helped him up. "Wouldn't want you stealing all the glory," Victor shot back. Together, they made their escape as more explosions tore through the compound. The cartel's operations were crippled, but Victor knew this wasn't over. Kane would retaliate, and soon. As they regrouped at a safe house, Kara contacted them with urgent news. "Victor, I decrypted more of those files. Kane's been tracking you since Dry Creek. He's got informants everywhere." Victor clenched his jaw. "He wants to isolate us. Make us paranoid." Maddox nodded. "Then we turn the tables. We find his next move before he finds ours." Victor looked at the map spread out before them. Kane had underestimated their resolve. He wasn't just dealing with old operatives. He was facing a community of people who wouldn't back down. "This ends soon," Victor said with quiet determination. "One way or another." As dawn broke, Victor's mind sharpened with a singular focus. Kane's reign of terror was nearing its final chapter. Victor stood over a large map of the border region, the room dimly lit by a single hanging light. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional static from his radio. Kane had outmaneuvered them too many times. This time, Victor wasn't going to wait for another ambush. He was going to turn the hunt around. Maddox entered the room, his face grim. Kara sent over the last batch of intel. "Looks like Kane's making his move soon. There's a convoy heading to a fortified airstrip across the border tomorrow night." Victor traced his finger across the map to the marked location. "This is where it ends. If Kane's leading that convoy, we cut him off before he can disappear again." "But what if it's another trap?" Maddox asked, raising an eyebrow. Victor's gaze hardened. "It probably is. But we've got no choice. We hit them hard and fast before they know we're there." That night, the team prepared for the assault. Sheriff Walker volunteered to hold the border crossing with his deputies, ensuring no cartel reinforcements could slip through. Meanwhile, Victor and Maddox would infiltrate the airstrip with Kara providing remote surveillance. As they reviewed their plan one last time, Kara's voice crackled through their earpieces. "I've got eyes on the convoy. Multiple vehicles, but no visual on Kane yet." Victor nodded. "We'll draw him out soon enough." The convoy reached the airstrip just after midnight. Under the cover of darkness, Victor and Maddox crept along the perimeter fence, disabling security cameras and taking out guards with silent precision. "Still no sign of Kane," Kara reported. "Wait, hold on. One of the trucks isn't on my radar anymore." Victor froze. "What do you mean it's not on your radar?" "It vanished," Kara said. "Could be a stealth transport or a decoy." Victor finished grimly. "They're splitting their forces to distract us. We need to find that truck." Maddox spotted movement near one of the hangars. A large cargo plane was being prepped for takeoff. Dozens of armed cartel enforcers stood guard. "Looks like they're planning to fly something out of here," he said. "We can't let that plane leave," Victor replied. "We take it down, and we cripple their supply chain." They moved swiftly, planting explosives on the plane's landing gear. Just as they finished, an all-too-familiar voice echoed across the airstrip. "Langston, I figured you'd come." Victor turned slowly to see Darren Kane standing near the hangar entrance, flanked by heavily armed guards. His expression was cold and calculating. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long," Kane continued. "But here we are, just like old times." Kane raised his hand, signaling his men to surround Victor and Maddox. The two operatives exchanged a quick glance, their backs pressed together. "This feels like déjà vu," Maddox muttered. "Except this time, we're ready," Victor replied. Victor pressed a hidden button on his wrist, detonating the charges on the plane. The explosion rocked the airstrip, sending cartel soldiers scrambling for cover. In the chaos, Victor and Maddox opened fire, taking advantage of the confusion. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly retreated toward a nearby truck. Victor saw him and gave chase, dodging gunfire as he sprinted across the tarmac. Kane's trying to escape. Victor shouted into his radio. "I've got him on thermal," Kara responded. "He's heading for the southern exit." Victor pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the pavement. This was his chance. He wasn't going to let Kane slip away again. Victor caught up to the truck just as it sped toward the gate. He fired several shots, hitting the tires and forcing the vehicle to swerve off the road. Kane stumbled out, clutching a pistol. "Still chasing ghosts, Langston?" Kane sneered, raising his weapon. "You should have stayed out of this." "I don't run from people like you," Victor said coldly. "You've hurt too many. It ends here." The two men circled each other, their weapons aimed. Before either could fire, Maddox arrived, disarming Kane with a precise shot to his hand. The gun clattered to the ground as Kane hissed in pain. "It's over," Maddox growled, but Kane smirked through the pain. "You think killing me will solve anything? You have no idea how deep this goes." Victor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Then start talking." Kane hesitated for a moment, then chuckled. "You think you've won? My men are already on the move. This operation is bigger than you realize." Victor pressed his foot against Kane's chest, pinning him to the ground. "We'll stop them, just like we stopped you." Kane's smirk faded as he realized there was no escape this time. As dawn broke, the airstrip lay in ruins. Sheriff Walker's deputies arrived to secure the scene and take the remaining cartel members into custody. Victor and Maddox stood over Kane, who was now bound and under guard. Kara's voice came through the radio. "I just intercepted communications from the cartel's leadership. They're in full retreat. You've dealt a serious blow to their operations." "It's not just about the cartel," Victor said quietly. "Kane's right. There's more to this. But for now, we've bought Dry Creek some peace." Maddox patted Victor on the shoulder. "Hell of a night. You ready for some rest?" Victor shook his head, gazing out at the rising sun. "Not yet. There are still loose ends to tie up." As the first rays of light bathed the landscape, Victor knew that the fight wasn't completely over. But for the first time in years, he felt something close to closure. Kane was defeated, and Dry Creek was safe, for now. The airstrip was eerily quiet after the gunfire had ceased. Most of the cartel's forces were either dead or captured, but Victor knew this victory wasn't complete. Kane was in custody, but his cryptic warnings still echoed in Victor's mind. "You have no idea how deep this goes." At sunrise, Sheriff Walker approached Victor and Maddox, his face set in a grim expression. "We've secured the area and rounded up all the prisoners. The state police are sending reinforcements, but something tells me this isn't over." "It's not," Victor replied, his gaze hard. "Kane's just one piece of the puzzle. Someone else has been feeding him resources and intel. We need to find out who." Maddox crossed his arms. "So, what's the plan? We interrogate Kane?" Victor shook his head. "He's too arrogant to give us anything right away. But we'll make him talk eventually. For now, we focus on dismantling the rest of his network." A few hours later, Kara contacted Victor with urgent news. "You're not going to like this," she said through the encrypted radio line. "I traced one of Kane's financial backers. It's someone you know." Victor stiffened. "Who?" There was a pause on the other end. "Ethan Monroe." Victor's stomach dropped. Ethan Monroe had been one of his closest allies during his time in the Navy, a trusted officer who had helped fund several covert operations. If Monroe was involved, it meant that Kane had access to classified resources from the highest levels. "I trusted him," Victor said quietly. "Yeah, well, looks like he's playing both sides now," Kara replied. "Monroe's been funneling money to multiple cartels under the radar. He might have been pulling strings for Kane this whole time." Victor relayed the information to Maddox and Walker. Maddox scowled. "Monroe? That's a hell of a betrayal. We can't just walk into his office and demand answers." "We won't," Victor replied. "Monroe's careful. He'll have contingencies. But we can use his own paranoia against him." Victor outlined a plan. They would spread disinformation through the cartel's remaining channels, making Monroe believe that his involvement had been exposed. If he felt cornered, he might make a mistake. The plan worked faster than expected. By evening, Kara intercepted a transmission from Monroe's personal security team. He was preparing to flee the country, booking a private jet to an undisclosed location. "We can intercept him before he takes off," Victor said, grabbing his gear. "This is our best chance to get answers." Victor, Maddox, and a small strike team made their way to a private airfield near the state line. They arrived just in time to see Monroe's convoy pulling onto the tarmac. Armed guards surrounded him as he walked toward the waiting jet. "Looks like he brought a small army," Maddox muttered. Victor smirked. "Good. He's scared." They moved into position, using the cover of darkness to approach the convoy unnoticed. Suddenly, one of Monroe's guards spotted movement. Gunfire erupted, shattering the tense silence. Victor and Maddox returned fire, using the vehicles as cover. Monroe ducked behind his guards, shouting orders. "Get me on that plane now." Victor flanked the convoy, taking out several guards with precise shots. Maddox provided cover fire, forcing the remaining gunmen to retreat. Victor closed in on Monroe, tackling him to the ground before he could reach the plane. "It's over, Monroe," Victor growled. "You're not going anywhere." Monroe struggled but froze when Victor pressed a pistol to his temple. "You don't understand," Monroe hissed. "I had no choice. Kane was just the beginning. There are others, People far more dangerous than you realize. Then start talking, Victor demanded. Monroe hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. There's a faction in the intelligence community. They've been using the cartels to destabilize border regions. They wanted plausible deniability. Kane was just a pawn. Victor's jaw tightened. Names. I want names. I can't, Monroe gasped. If I do, I'm dead. Then you're dead either way, Victor replied coldly. Before Monroe could answer, an explosion rocked the airfield. Victor turned to see one of the fuel tanks engulfed in flames. A second convoy was approaching fast. More cartel reinforcements, likely sent to extract Monroe. We've got company, Maddox shouted. Victor grabbed Monroe by the collar and dragged him toward cover. You're coming with us, he growled. A fierce firefight erupted as the cartel reinforcements stormed the airfield. Victor and Maddox fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered. Monroe panicked, attempting to break free. You're not going anywhere, Victor snapped, slamming Monroe against a crate. You wanted to play both sides. Now you deal with the consequences. Maddox radioed Kara. We need extraction now. Helicopter blades roared overhead as a rescue team arrived, providing air support. Gunfire from the chopper scattered the cartel forces, giving Victor and Maddox the chance to regroup. They hauled Monroe into the helicopter as the airfield burned behind them. Victor stared at Monroe with icy determination. This isn't over. You're going to tell me everything. As the helicopter ascended, Monroe finally broke. All right, there's a meeting, high-level operatives, cartel leaders, corrupt officials. They're gathering in 2 days. If you stop them, you'll cripple the entire network. Victor nodded. Good. You just earned yourself a chance to live. As the lights of the airfield faded in the distance, Victor felt the weight of the fight ahead. This wasn't just about Kane anymore. The battle for Dry Creek had led them into a web of global corruption and power. But one thing was clear. The next confrontation would decide everything. 2 days later, Victor, Maddox, Kara, and Sheriff Walker stood on a ridge overlooking an isolated luxury estate deep in the desert. It was a fortress, a sprawling compound surrounded by armed guards, high-tech surveillance, and layers of security. Inside, cartel leaders, corrupt officials, and rogue operatives from various intelligence agencies were preparing for a meeting that could redefine control over the border regions. This is it, Victor said, tightening the straps of his tactical vest. We cut off the head of the snake here and now. Kara, monitoring surveillance feeds from a drone, spoke through her headset. They're heavily armed, but I've found a weak point near the west perimeter. You'll have a small window to breach the compound when the patrol shifts. Maddox chuckled grimly. Sounds like fun. Just like old times, huh? Except the stakes are higher, Victor replied. Let's move. The team infiltrated the compound with surprising ease. The patrols were light near the west entrance, just as Kara had predicted. But Victor couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Everything was too quiet. As they slipped through the shadows, Kara's voice came through urgently. Hold up. I'm seeing movement near the central courtyard. Looks like the meeting is starting early. Victor signaled for the team to pick up the pace. They reached a vantage point overlooking the courtyard and saw a gathering of powerful figures, including cartel bosses and Monroe's contact in the intelligence community, a man named Richard Hale. Victor's eyes narrowed. Hale. I should have known he was involved. Hale began addressing the crowd, his voice cold and authoritative. The recent disruptions to our operations were unfortunate, but manageable. We have contingencies in place. By the end of the week, we'll have full control of the southern routes again. Victor clenched his fists. He's planning to escalate. They're not just securing drug routes. They're expanding their influence across multiple regions. We have to act now, Maddox whispered. Victor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. We hit them hard. No one leaves here free. The team moved into position, but before they could strike, an explosion rocked the compound. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted. Kara's voice crackled over the radio. Victor, what the hell was that? I didn't trigger anything. Victor cursed under his breath. Someone else is making a move. Through the smoke, masked figures emerged, firing at both the cartel guards and the gathered officials. A new faction had entered the fray, mercenaries highly trained and ruthless. They're after the same targets, Maddox said, taking cover. Looks like Kane's not the only one with enemies. Stay focused, Victor ordered. We use the confusion to our advantage. As gunfire erupted on all sides, Victor spotted Hale retreating through a hidden corridor with a small group of guards. He's trying to escape, Victor shouted. Maddox nodded. Go. I'll cover you. Victor broke from cover, sprinting after Hale. He navigated through the crumbling compound, dodging falling debris and firefights. He finally caught up to Hale near a loading dock. Langston, Hale sneered, raising his hands mockingly. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You betrayed your oath, Victor said coldly. How many lives did you sell for this power? Hale chuckled. You're so naive. This isn't about power. It's about survival. We control chaos so the world doesn't collapse into it. You can't win against us. We'll see about that, Victor replied, stepping forward. Before Victor could act, Hale's guards lunged at him. A brutal fight ensued. Victor disarmed the first attacker with a swift strike, using the guard's weapon to take down the others. Hale attempted to flee, but Victor grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against a wall. You're done, Victor growled. Give me the names of everyone involved. Hale smirked despite the pain. Even if I did, it wouldn't matter. There's always someone else ready to take my place. Not this time, Victor replied, knocking him unconscious. Meanwhile, Maddox and Walker were pinned down near the compound's main entrance. The mercenaries were relentless, but Kara directed them to an alternate escape route through a maintenance tunnel. We can't hold this position much longer, Maddox shouted over the gunfire. Victor, where are you? Walker demanded through the radio. On my way, Victor replied. He dragged Hale's unconscious body toward the rendezvous point. As Victor reached the tunnel entrance, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. Marcus, the ex-operative who had allied with the cartel. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? Marcus sneered, blocking Victor's path. Victor sighed, raising his weapon. You never know when to quit, do you? Marcus smirked. Neither do you. The two men clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, trading punches and grappling for control. Victor finally gained the upper hand, delivering a knockout blow that sent Marcus sprawling to the ground. Victor rejoined the team in the tunnel, carrying Hale over his shoulder. Let's get out of here before this place collapses, he said. Explosions echoed behind them as they made their escape. The compound was in ruins, and the cartel's leadership had been decimated. As they emerged into the desert, Kara's voice came through the radio. I've got news. Local authorities are moving in to secure the area. You've got a clear path to safety. Good, Victor replied. We're bringing Hale with us. He's going to give us everything we need to take down what's left of this network. Maddox grinned. Looks like the tide's turning. As dawn broke over the desert, Victor reflected on the battle they had just fought. The war wasn't over, but they had struck a decisive blow. For the first time, he felt the weight of hope, a belief that they could finally dismantle the corruption that had plagued their lives. But he knew one truth for certain. The fight wasn't over until the last shadow fell. Let's finish this, Victor said, leading the team toward their next mission. The sun rose higher in the desert sky as Victor and his team approached their safe house. Inside, Kara was waiting, monitoring encrypted communications for any sign of retaliation. They had crippled the cartel's leadership and captured Richard Hale, but Victor knew this wasn't the end. The fight always ended with betrayal, sacrifice, and one final move on the chessboard. Sheriff Walker helped secure Hale in a reinforced holding room. You think he'll talk? Walker asked. He will, Victor replied, his voice low. He's too smart not to. He knows he has only one chance to stay alive. Maddox leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You think Kane's going to try something? Or is he done for good now? Victor's eyes hardened. Men like Kane never stop. He'll make his move soon. We have to be ready. As if on cue, Kara's voice crackled through the radio. We've got a problem. There's chatter on the cartel's encrypted channels. Someone's sending a kill order on Hale, and it's coming from inside U.S. borders. Victor's jaw tightened. It's Monroe's contacts. They're cleaning house. Maddox straightened. If they find out we've got Hale, They'll come for us next. Victor nodded. Then we bait them out. Let them come, but on our terms. Victor devised a plan to fake Hale's transfer to another location. They leaked false intel through Kara's network, making it appear as though he was being transported to a nearby airfield. Meanwhile, the team fortified the safe house and prepared for a final showdown. Kara glanced at Victor. You sure about this? If they don't take the bait, we'll be sitting ducks. They'll come, Victor said confidently. They can't afford to leave any loose ends. Just before midnight, their enemies arrived. A convoy of black SUVs roared toward the compound, headlights cutting through the darkness. Armed mercenaries and cartel soldiers surrounded the perimeter. Looks like we've got their attention, Maddox muttered, checking his rifle. Victor spoke into his radio. Everyone, hold your positions. Wait for my signal. The attackers advanced cautiously, unaware that Victor had planted explosives along key entry points. As soon as they breached the outer defenses, Victor triggered the charges. The explosions lit up the night, sending waves of shock and panic through the enemy ranks. In the confusion, Victor and his team launched a counterattack. Maddox and Walker led a flanking maneuver, cutting off the attackers' escape routes. Victor moved through the battlefield like a ghost, taking out key targets with silent precision. Over the radio, Kara warned, "More reinforcements are inbound. They're not giving up without a fight." "Let them come," Victor replied. "We've got the upper hand here." Victor eventually came face to face with the leader of the assault, a man in tactical gear who removed his mask to reveal a familiar face. It was Darren Kane. "You just don't know when to die, do you?" Kane sneered, leveling a pistol at Victor. "Neither do you," Victor replied, calmly stepping forward. The two men circled each other, weapons drawn. Kane smirked. "You think killing me will fix any of this? You'll still be a pawn in a game you can't win." "I'm done playing games," Victor said coldly. The fight was brutal and personal. Victor and Kane exchanged blows, their years of experience evident in every move. Victor finally disarmed Kane, pinning him to the ground. "This is for everyone you hurt," Victor growled, holding his knife to Kane's throat. Kane laughed bitterly. "You think you're any better than me? We were made by the same system." "Maybe," Victor said, "but I chose to protect people. You chose to destroy them." Victor knocked Kane unconscious and restrained him. The remaining attackers, realizing their leader was captured, began to retreat. Maddox radioed in, "They're pulling back. Looks like they're done." Victor took a deep breath, finally allowing himself a moment of relief. "Good. Secure the perimeter. We're finishing this tonight." With Kane and Hale both in custody, Victor turned his attention to Kara. "Get this intel to the right people. We expose everything. Names, locations, operations. No more secrets." Kara hesitated. "You know this won't make you popular with the government. There are people who won't want this coming to light." "I'm not in this for popularity," Victor replied. "It's time the truth came out." Later that night, Victor stood alone outside the safe house, watching the stars. Maddox joined him, handing him a drink. "Well, it's done," Maddox said quietly. "Kane's locked up. The cartel's broken. What now?" Victor stared into the distance. "We rebuild. Dry Creek deserves peace. And if anyone else comes after us, we'll be ready." Maddox grinned. "You ever think about retirement?" Victor chuckled softly. "I tried that once. Didn't work out too well." As dawn broke over the desert, Victor reflected on everything they had endured. The battles, betrayals, and sacrifices had led them to this moment. The shadows that had haunted them were finally fading, replaced by the light of a new beginning. But deep down, Victor knew the world would always have darkness. His mission was to keep it at bay, for as long as he could. "We've won for now," he said softly, "but there's always more work to do." With that, Victor turned back toward the safe house, ready to face whatever challenges the future held. The last shadow had fallen, but his fight for justice would never truly end. As dawn fully broke over the desert horizon, Victor and his team stood together outside the safe house, the weight of their hard-won victory finally sinking in. Maddox lit a cigar, offering one to Victor, who shook his head with a faint smirk.